She rode alone through the dust of a Texas afternoon, pulled her horse to a stop in front of a man she had never spoken to, and said the words she had practiced 100 times but never truly believed she would say. "Mr. Dawson, I need you to marry me." Jacob Dawson set down his hammer. He looked at her the way a man looks at something that cannot possibly be real. If you're watching this story for the first time, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment, tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Evelyn Hartwell had been admired for so long that people had forgotten to actually see her. That was the quiet truth behind every smile she gave in town, every polite nod, every careful word she chose in public. People watched her the way just a painting, appreciating the surface, never wondering what was underneath. She was the daughter of Jacob Hartwell, who had built the most respected supply store in Willow Creek, Texas. She was 28 years old, unmarried by choice, and possessed of a mind that most of the men in town would have found threatening if they had ever bothered to notice it. They noticed other things instead: the way she walked, the way she held herself, the way her dark hair caught the afternoon light when she stepped out of the store to greet customers. Evelyn was used to being looked at. She was not used to being understood. And for a long time that was fine. She had her father. She had the store. She had work that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. And in the early years, that had been enough. She managed the accounts while Gerald handled relationships with suppliers. She organized shipments, tracked inventory, noticed when prices shifted in ways that most merchants didn't catch until it was too late. She was, in every practical sense, the reason Hartwell Supply continued to thrive, even as other businesses in Willow Creek struggled. But prosperity had a way of making enemies. And in Willow Creek, the most dangerous enemy was a man named Charles Whitmore. Whitmore owned more land than anyone else in the county. He had arrived 12 years earlier with capital and connections, and a talent for making people feel they had no choice but to agree with him. He controlled water rights on the eastern side of the valley. He had arrangements with 3 of the largest cattle operations in the region. When he wanted something from a business in Willow Creek, he asked once politely. If the answer was no, he asked again less politely. And if the answer remained no, he found other ways. Jacob Hartwell had told him no twice. The third conversation had happened 4 months ago, and since then things at Hartwell Supply had begun going wrong in quiet, difficult-to-prove ways. Suppliers who had worked with them for years started citing reasons to delay shipments. A warehouse lease that had been reliable for a decade suddenly faced a dispute over ownership. 2 of their longest-standing accounts ranchers who had purchased feed and equipment from them, Wistobry, began going elsewhere without explanation. None of it was dramatic. None of it was the kind of thing you could take to the sheriff and point to as wrongdoing. It was just pressure, constant, grinding, invisible pressure. And Jacob Hartwell was 71 years old, with a heart that the doctor in town had been watching carefully for the past 2 years. He did not need pressure. He needed exactly the opposite. Evelyn had kept most of this from him. She handled the account disputes herself. She rode out to speak with the ranchers who had stopped coming in. She wrote careful letters to the suppliers. She worked until midnight some nights, sitting at the desk in the back office of the store, trying to find a way through a problem that grew worse every time she thought she had it solved. She did not tell her father how bad it was. She did not tell anyone. Because telling people meant admitting that Charles Whitmore was winning, and Evelyn Hartwell was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat gracefully. But one evening in early July, she sat at that desk and looked at the numbers. And for the first time, she could not find the path forward. The accounts were down. The warehouse dispute was going to cost money they didn't have. 2 more suppliers had written with concerns. And Whitmore had sent a message through an intermediary, a lawyer named Preston, who always smelled faintly of imported tobacco, suggesting that a meeting might be beneficial. Evelyn knew what that meeting would lead to. He would offer to help with the pressure. He would offer it as generosity. He would frame it as an opportunity rather than what it actually was, a slow controlled acquisition of everything her father had built. She burned the lawyer's letter. Then she sat in the quiet of the back office and thought about what she actually had available to her. She could sell. There were buyers, Whitmore among them, of course, but others as well. She could walk away from Hartwell Supply, with enough to keep her father comfortable the rest of his life and herself for many years after. But selling meant surrendering. It meant admitting that she had no power. It meant watching her father spend his final years knowing that everything he had worked for had been taken from him without a fight. She could stay and fight directly. She could take the dispute to the county board, try to get the warehouse lease resolved through official channels, write to suppliers in other regions, rebuild the accounts from scratch. She had enough intelligence and enough stubbornness to attempt it. But she was a single woman operating a business in 1887, in a county where Whitmore had spent years building alliances with every official who mattered. The moment she became a visible problem, he had ways of making her disappear that had nothing to do with violence. Reputation, rumor, the quiet withdrawal of cooperation from every corner of a small community that depended on his goodwill. She needed something else. She needed a different kind of protection. The thought came to her slowly, the way uncomfortable truths often do. Not all at once, but in pieces, each piece arriving and sitting quietly while she pushed it away. Until finally, there were enough of them that she couldn't ignore them anymore. She needed a husband, not because she was weak, not because she had given up, but because the world she lived in had rules that she had not written, and pretending those rules didn't exist was a luxury she could no longer afford. A married woman had a husband standing behind her in legal matters. A married woman with a respectable husband was harder to slander. A married woman whose husband was known for integrity and independence was a much less convenient target than a single woman operating alone. She needed the right husband. That was the problem. Because marriage was not something she took lightly. And the men available to her in Willow Creek were, for the most part, either controlled by Whitmore's money or interested in her for exactly the wrong reasons. She spent 2 weeks thinking about it. She went through every man she knew in the county, evaluating not their wealth or their looks but their character, their history, the choices they had made when those choices were difficult. And one name kept coming back, Jacob Dawson. She knew of him the way everyone in Willow Creek knew of him from a distance. Through reputation, through the things people said when his name came up in conversation. He was 36. He had built his cattle ranch from almost nothing after arriving in the county 8 years ago with little more than a horse and a willingness to work harder than anyone around him. He was not rich, but he was stable. He owed nothing to anyone. And he had said no to Charles Whitmore. That fact alone had made Evelyn take notice 3 years ago, when Whitmore had approached Jacob about a water rights arrangement that would have benefited Whitmore considerably and left Jacob with a slightly better pasture lease. It was the kind of deal that seemed reasonable on the surface. Most men would have taken it. Jacob had declined. When pressed, he had reportedly told Whitmore's intermediary that he didn't do business with men who asked for more than they offered, and that he had enough pasture to manage without complications. That was all. No drama, no confrontation, just a clear, quiet no. Evelyn had stored that information somewhere in the back of her mind without fully understanding why. Now she understood. She spent 3 more days arguing with herself about what she was considering. It was not a conventional decision. It was, by any standard measure, a reckless one. Riding out to a man's ranch to propose marriage to someone she had barely spoken to was the kind of thing that women did not do in 1887, not in Willow Creek, not anywhere she knew of. But Evelyn Hartwell had stopped caring very much about convention the moment she realized convention was going to let Charles Whitmore destroy everything her father had built. She told her father she was going to check on a supplier. She saddled her horse in the early morning, while the town was still quiet. And she rode 12 miles through the Texas summer heat to find a man she barely knew and ask him to change both their lives. She had expected him to laugh. or to look at her with the particular expression that men sometimes wore when a woman said something that surprised them, that careful blankness that preceded either condescension or dismissal. Jacob Dawson did neither. He set down the fence post he had been working on. He looked at her for a long moment with pale gray eyes that didn't reveal much. And he said, "Say that again." "I need you to marry me," Evelyn said. "I know how that sounds. I am asking you to hear me out before you answer." He didn't say anything. He just waited. That surprised her more than anything else he could have done. Most men would have already started talking, defending, questioning, reacting. Jacob just stood there in the afternoon heat and waited for her to continue, with a patience that seemed entirely natural, as though he had all the time in the world and intended to use it carefully. She had rehearsed a version of this speech many times. In the actual moment, she threw most of it away and told him the truth instead. She told him about her father's health. She told him about Whitmore's pressure and the accounts and the warehouse dispute. She did not minimize any of it, and she did not ask for sympathy. She laid it out the way she would have laid out a business problem for a supplier, factually, completely, without decoration. "I need a husband who is respected but not controlled," she said. "Someone who has already proven he can say no to Whitmore. Someone whose reputation is not something that can be easily damaged." "And you thought of me," Jacob said. "I've been watching you for 3 years," Evelyn said. "Not like that. I mean, I've paid attention. I know what kind of man you are in the ways that actually matter. You don't owe money you can't pay. You don't make promises you can't keep. You helped the Pattersons last winter when their feed ran short, and you didn't talk about it afterward. You turned down Whitmore's arrangement, even when it would have been easy to take it." "That's a careful kind of watching," Jacob said. "I'm a careful kind of person," Evelyn replied. There was a silence between them. Not an uncomfortable one. Exactly. Jacob seemed to be processing something, his eyes moving slightly to the side, in the way of someone genuinely thinking, rather than performing thought. "What do you expect from me?" he asked finally. "In this marriage?" "Exactly what I've told you," she said. "Your name, your standing, your presence when it matters. I'm not asking you to pretend to love me. I'm not asking you to change your life more than necessary. I can help with the ranch. I can manage accounts and supplies and correspondence. I'm better with numbers than most men I know, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I can see that," he said. "You rode 12 miles in July to propose to a man you've never spoken to. That's not something a woman who avoids hard work does." Something almost like a smile crossed her face. She hadn't expected him to have a sense of humor. "Come back tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll give you an honest answer." She wanted to press him. She wanted to know what he was thinking, wanted to read something in his expression that would tell her which way he was leaning. But she recognized that pushing would be exactly the wrong move with a man like Jacob Dawson. So, she nodded. She turned her horse, and she rode back through the afternoon heat, with her heart working harder than she would have liked to admit. Jacob stood at the fence line for a long time after she left. He was not a man who made decisions impulsively, and he knew better than to mistake the novelty of what had just happened for clarity. What he needed was to think. He had known who Evelyn Hartwell was, the way everyone in Willow Creek knew. He had noticed her the same way anyone with working eyes noticed her. But beyond the obvious, he had known other things, the things that got said in passing at the feed store or the mill, things that painted a picture if you were paying attention. People mentioned her father's store in the same breath, as words like steady and fair and Gerald always treats you right. People talked about the daughter who ran the accounts. People said things like bright as a whip, that one, with a kind of grudging admiration that told him the people saying it were slightly unsettled by it. He had never spoken to her before today, but he had thought about Charles Whitmore plenty. What Evelyn had described, the quiet pressure, the delayed shipments, the withdrawn accounts, was exactly how Whitmore operated. Jacob had seen it happen to 3 other businesses in the past 8 years. The pattern was always the same. He never did anything dramatic. He just made things difficult in ways that were hard to name. and he waited for people to get tired of difficult and come to him for relief. Jacob understood what it meant that he had said no to Whitmore's arrangement 3 years ago. He understood that it had cost him nothing so far, only because he wasn't big enough to be worth pursuing. A cattle ranch of his size, with no water rights vulnerability, was more effort than Whitmore needed to expend. But if he married Evelyn Hartwell, that would change. He stood at the kitchen table that night and thought about what he was willing to risk. He thought about his ranch, 8 years of work, every fence post, every head of cattle, every repaired roof and cleared pasture represented something he had done alone, because he had believed that alone was safer, quieter, less complicated. He thought about his brother, James, who had died of fever 6 years ago. James had been the only person Jacob had been genuinely close to, and losing him had settled something in Jacob's chest that he had carried ever since, a kind of careful emptiness that was easier to live with than the alternative. He thought about the empty chair at his kitchen table. He had told himself for years that the chair being empty was a choice, a preference, that he was a man who operated better alone. Sitting in the quiet kitchen that night, for the first time in a very long while, he let himself be honest about it. The chair wasn't empty because he preferred it that way. It was empty because he had stopped believing anyone would want to fill it. And then a woman he barely knew had ridden 12 miles through July heat to ask him a question that no one in 8 years had come close to asking. Not because she needed to be saved, because she had looked at him, actually looked. The careful watching she had described, and decided he was worth asking. Jacob was not a sentimental man. He knew exactly what Evelyn was proposing, and he respected her enough not to pretend it was something more romantic than it was. She needed protection. He could provide it. She could help with the ranch. That was useful. It was a practical arrangement. But underneath the practical arrangement was something he hadn't anticipated. Someone had watched him for 3 years and seen things worth noting. Not the things people usually said about him. Not hard-working and keeps to himself, and that man will die alone. But the Patterson feed, the Whitmore refusal, the promises he kept without advertising it. She had been paying attention to the parts of him that actually mattered. By the time the lamp burned low, he had his answer. She arrived the next morning before 7. Jacob was already outside, coffee in hand, when her horse came over the rise. He waited until she dismounted and walked to where he stood. "Yes," he said. Evelyn stopped moving. Something crossed her face that he couldn't entirely name, not joy exactly, but something like relief, mixed with something more complicated. "Yes," she repeated. "I'll marry you," he said, "but I need you to understand something first." She met his eyes. "All right. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you," he said. "And I'm not doing it because you're beautiful, and I'm a lonely man who couldn't say no. I'm doing it because what you described about Whitmore is wrong. And I've watched him operate for 8 years and never had a reason to do anything about it until now. I'm doing it because you came out here and told me the truth when it would have been easier to construct something more flattering. And I'm doing it because I think you can actually handle this ranch. And I haven't had a partner who could do that." He paused. "But I need you to understand that I'm not pretending this is something it isn't. It's an arrangement. It might stay an arrangement. I can't promise you anything beyond what I've said." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "I don't need promises," she said. "I need honesty. And you've already given me more of that in 2 conversations than most people give in years." "All right then," Jacob said. "All right," Evelyn agreed. They stood there for a moment in the morning quiet. 2 people who had just fundamentally altered the course of their lives, trying to understand the weight of what they had decided. Then Jacob said, "You want coffee?" I made too much, and Evelyn Hartwell, who had been carrying the weight of her family's survival for 4 months without anyone to share it, felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like she might not be entirely alone anymore. "Yes," she said. "I would like that." They were married 11 days later. Evelyn had wanted to tell her father in person, and that conversation had been the hardest thing she had done in months. Not because Gerald Hartwell objected he didn't. He had looked at her carefully, the way he always had when she brought him a problem she'd already solved, and asked if she was certain. "I'm certain," she said. "You know this isn't what I wanted for you," he said. "I wanted you to have." "I know what you wanted," Evelyn said gently. "But this is what I chose. And I chose it the way I choose everything, because it was right. Not because it was easy." Gerald had met Jacob twice before the wedding. The first meeting had been brief and formal, Jacob standing in the doorway of Hartwell Supply with his hat in his hands, treating Gerald with the particular respect a man gives to someone he knows is watching him carefully. The second meeting had been longer. Gerald had asked Jacob direct questions and received direct answers. And at the end of it, he had looked at his daughter and said, "He's a straight man." For Gerald Hartwell, that was the highest compliment available. The ceremony was small. A minister, Gerald, and two friends of Evelyn's, Clara Webb, who ran the schoolhouse, and Dorothea Mills, who had been her friend since childhood and who cried through the entire proceeding with a thoroughness that Evelyn found both embarrassing and genuinely touching. Jacob's side of the room held no one. Evelyn had noticed that and had wondered about it, but hadn't asked. There would be time for the questions that mattered, and she had learned enough about Jacob in 11 days to know that he would answer them honestly, asked when she asked the right ones at the right moments. The minister read the words. They said what was required. Jacob put a plain gold ring on her finger. She found out later that he had ridden into town specifically to buy it, refusing to give her something secondhand. When it was done, Gerald shook Jacob's hand and held on a moment longer than a regular handshake required. "Take care of her," Gerald said. "She seems fairly capable of taking care of herself," Jacob replied. "But I'll be there regardless." Gerald had laughed for the first time in months. The first weeks at the ranch were the strangest of Evelyn's life. She had known it would be an adjustment. What she hadn't anticipated was how intimate the adjustment would be in ways that had nothing to do with romance. It was the small things that were hardest. Sharing a kitchen with someone who had specific habits and was not accustomed to explaining them. Navigating the particular silence of a man who thought in long, uninterrupted stretches and was surprised when conversation interrupted it. Understanding which questions Jacob would answer at length and which ones he would absorb quietly and circle back to an hour later. Having thought them through completely, he gave her the bedroom. He slept in the smaller room at the back of the house that he had been using as storage, and she found he had cleared it and moved a decent bed into it without saying anything about the arrangement. "You don't have to sleep in the storage room," Evelyn said the first morning. "It's not the storage room anymore," Jacob said. "I moved the storage." "Where, barn?" She had decided not to argue. She understood what he was doing, creating a version of the arrangement that gave them both something like privacy, without requiring either of them to acknowledge how unusual everything was. She appreciated it more than she said. She spent those first days learning the ranch the way she learned everything systematically. She asked about the cattle operation, and Jacob explained it without condescension, treating her questions as legitimate rather than indulging them. When she found the accounts ledger and went through it, she found what she had suspected from a distance, that Jacob was profitable but not organized, that he was leaving money on the table through inefficiency rather than inability. She did not tell him he was doing it wrong. She asked him what he was trying to accomplish with the next season's operations, listened carefully to the answer, and then showed him 3 places where the numbers could be improved. He sat across the table from her that evening and went through her calculations quietly, checking them against his own understanding of the operation. He didn't say anything for a long time. "You found something in a day that I've missed for 2 years, he said finally. "I've been looking at account books since I was 14, Evelyn said. "It's not impressive. It's just practice. Most people with your practice charge a lot of money for it," Jacob said. "Most people with your patience in listening to someone they barely know go through their financial records are harder to find than you might think," Evelyn replied. Something shifted in Jacob's expression. It was small, just a slight easing around the eyes. A fraction of the careful distance he maintained, dropping back. "Fair enough," he said. It was the closest thing to warmth she had seen from him, and she found herself thinking about it long after the lamp went out. News of the marriage spread through Willow Creek, the way news always spread, faster than anyone wanted and with considerably more commentary than anyone asked for. The reactions divided along predictable lines. People who had admired Evelyn from afar were confused. She could have married wealth. She could have married standing. She had instead married a rancher who lived 12 miles outside of town and was known primarily for being solitary and self-sufficient. People who actually thought about it understood better than the others. A woman like Evelyn Hartwell didn't make decisions carelessly. If she had chosen Jacob Dawson, there was a reason. And the people who understood that watched with interest. Charles Whitmore understood it most of all. He heard the news on the same day as everyone else. And unlike the others, he was not confused, he was angry. The anger was not the kind that showed on a man's face. Whitmore was too controlled for that. It was the kind of anger that went still and cold and then started making plans with a particular methodical intensity that people who had crossed him before would have recognized immediately. Evelyn Hartwell had done something very specific. She had placed herself behind a wall he could not easily knock down. Jacob Dawson was not under his influence. Jacob Dawson had no debts he could use, no dependencies he could threaten, no ambitions he could redirect. And now Jacob Dawson was married to the woman whose family business he had been quietly, systematically disabling. The pressure he had applied to Hartwell Supply would have to change. Because it wasn't working anymore. Whitmore sat in his study that evening and thought about what working now would look like. He was still thinking when the lamp burned down, but he had an idea. Evelyn did not know about Whitmore's response yet. What she knew in those first weeks at the ranch was that Jacob Dawson was not the man people thought he was. People thought he was simply solitary. The truth was more interesting. He was solitary the way someone becomes solitary when they've had enough loss that they've stopped believing in the safety of attachment, not because they prefer isolation, but because isolation has started to feel like protection. She saw it in small things. The way he checked the barn twice before coming in at night, methodically and without hurry, going through each section the same way every time. The way he fixed things the moment they needed fixing, never letting a problem accumulate. The way he had quietly memorized her preferences over the first week, that she drank her coffee without sugar, that she worked better when she could see out a window, that she didn't like being startled from behind and adjusted without mentioning it. He was paying attention, the same way she had paid attention to him from across the distance of 12 miles in 3 years. She didn't say anything about it, but she noticed. One evening about 3 weeks after the wedding, she was working at the desk by the window, going through supply correspondence when Jacob came in from the fields and stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her at the desk. She looked up at him from the correspondence. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Jacob said, "The Pattersons are in trouble again." "What kind of trouble?" Evelyn asked. "Lost 3 head to illness last week. They're down on feed, and the season's not good. Do they need? I was going to bring them some of the extra grain we set aside," Jacob said. "But I wanted to check with you first. You're managing the accounts now." She had not expected that. She had not expected him to ask. "Do it," she said. "We can absorb it." Jacob nodded. "They'll try to pay it back," he said. "Tell them not to," Evelyn said. "Tell them to pay it forward when their season improves." Jacob looked at her for a moment. "All right," he said. He went back out. Evelyn turned back to her correspondence and found that she was smiling without having decided to. She stopped smiling. She told herself to focus on the accounts. But the smile came back anyway. It was 29 days after the wedding when Whitmore made his first real move. It did not come at the ranch. It came at Hartwell Supply, where Gerald was negotiating a lumber order with a supplier from San Antonio who had been reliable for 6 years. The supplier arrived apologetic and uncomfortable, and told Gerald that he had received information suggesting Hartwell Supply's credit standing was uncertain. Gerald had known immediately where the information had come from. He wrote to Evelyn that evening. She read the letter at the desk by the window, with Jacob sitting across the room, sharpening a blade that didn't need sharpening. When she set the letter down, he looked at her. "What happened?" he said. She told him. Jacob set down the blade. "He's testing," Jacob said. "I know," Evelyn said. "He's not certain yet what we're going to do," Jacob continued. "He's seeing how we respond. If we respond with panic, he escalates," Evelyn said, "and if we don't respond at all, he assumes he can keep doing it and will absorb it. So we respond," Jacob said. But carefully. They looked at each other across the room. It was the first time Evelyn had experienced what she would later think of as the particular quality of thinking with Jacob, the way two minds working on the same problem from different angles could arrive somewhere neither would have reached alone. "I need to go to town tomorrow," she said. "I'll come with you," Jacob said. She started to say it wasn't necessary. Then she thought about Whitmore. Then she said thank you. Jacob picked up the blade again. Evelyn picked up her pen and began writing back to her father. Outside the Texas night was quiet and enormous and full of things they couldn't yet see. But for the first time in 4 months, Evelyn Hartwell did not feel like she was facing them alone. The letter to Gerald was 3 pages long by the time Evelyn finished it. She did not minimize what was happening, but she was careful about how she framed it. Her father was a man who had spent 40 years in business, and he deserved the truth without the kind of softening that would insult his intelligence. She told him what Jacob had said about Whitmore testing them. She told him to proceed with the lumber supplier as though nothing had changed, to pay promptly, to be polite, and to say nothing about where the false information had originated. She told him to let her handle it. Then she added a line at the end that she had not planned. "You gave me everything I needed to fight this, Papa. Every number I learned at that desk, every difficult customer you let me handle, every time you trusted me to find a solution when you could have done it yourself. I am using all of it now. Don't worry about me." She sealed the letter and set it aside. Jacob was already asleep in the back room by the time she blew out the lamp. She lay in the dark and thought about the supplier from San Antonio. It was not random. Whitmore had chosen him deliberately, a man who had an existing relationship with Hartwell Supply, a man whose concern would carry weight because it came from a trusted direction. That kind of precision required information. It meant Whitmore had someone watching the store, cataloging the relationships, identifying which threads to pull. She closed her eyes and thought about who Willow Creek might be reporting to Whitmore. It was not a comfortable thing to think about, but discomfort had never stopped her from thinking clearly. And she needed to know. By the time she fell asleep, she had a list of 4 names. They rode into Willow Creek the next morning. Jacob on his sorrel and Evelyn on her own mare, side by side on the main road. It was the first time they had appeared in town together since the wedding, and Evelyn was conscious in the precise, unsentimental way. She was conscious of most things that people were watching. Not obviously, not rudely, but in the particular way of a small town that has decided something interesting has happened and is trying to determine what to make of it. She kept her posture straight and her expression calm, the same face she had worn through every difficult thing for the past 4 months. Jacob rode beside her, as though appearing in town with a wife he had married 3 weeks ago was something he did every day. She appreciated that more than she let herself show. They went to Hartwell Supply first. Gerald was behind the counter when they came in, and the way his face changed when he saw Jacob beside his daughter, something in the shoulders releasing, a tightness around the eyes easing, told Evelyn everything she needed to know about how frightened he had actually been. "Sit down, Papa," she said. "We need to talk about the Patterson account." She used the Patterson account as an opening because it was simple and concrete and gave Jacob a reason to sit at the table without the meeting feeling like a war council. They discussed the Patterson feed situation. Gerald asked Jacob practical questions about the grazing season, and Jacob answered them directly. And Evelyn watched her father decide gradually, over the course of 20 minutes, that he liked this man. It was only at the end, when the Patterson account was resolved and the conversation had settled into a comfortable lull, that Gerald said the San Antonio situation. I know, Evelyn said. He's done this before. To the Coopers 2 years ago. The lumber supplier thing was just the beginning. I know that too. So what are we doing? Gerald asked. He looked at Evelyn when he asked, not Jacob. It was not dismissiveness. Gerald Hartwell respected Jacob Dawson. Evelyn could see that. But he knew his daughter. He knew where the plan would come from. We're not running, Evelyn said. Gerald looked at her for a long moment. I didn't raise you to run, he said. No, she agreed. You didn't. Jacob had been listening without speaking. Gerald turned to him now with the directness of an old man who had stopped having patience for anything indirect. What about you? Gerald said. This isn't your fight. It wasn't your fight until 3 weeks ago. I know whose fight it is, Jacob said. I'm here because I want to be here. That's not what I asked. No, Jacob said. I suppose it isn't. He was quiet for a moment. I've watched Whitmore operate in this county for 8 years. Every time he goes after someone, the people around them find reasons to look away. I've looked away plenty myself. He paused. I'm done looking away. Gerald Hartwell studied him the way he had studied every business arrangement that mattered. Then he nodded once, slowly. Good, he said. They were coming out of Hartwell Supply when Evelyn saw the lawyer. Preston Whitmore's intermediary, the man who always smelled of imported tobacco. He was standing across the street in front of the assayer's office, and he was watching them with an expression of careful neutrality that was almost as revealing as open hostility. Jacob saw him at the same moment. Neither of them said anything. Evelyn simply looked directly at Preston, long enough for him to know she had seen him, and then turned away and continued walking. He's reporting back, Jacob said quietly. Good, Evelyn said. Let him. Jacob glanced at her. You want Whitmore to know we came to town together, he said. It was not a question. I want Whitmore to know we're not afraid to come to town together, Evelyn said. There's a difference. They stopped at the feed store because Jacob had a legitimate order to place. And while he was inside, Evelyn stood at the front, and 3 women from town came by with the particular air of people who have been wondering something and have decided this is their moment. The first was Margaret Holt, who was married to the county's second-largest landowner and had always been precisely civil to Evelyn, in the way of a woman who considers another woman her competition without ever saying so directly. Evelyn, Margaret said, we heard you'd gotten married. We were all quite surprised, were you? Evelyn said pleasantly. Jacob Dawson is a perfectly fine man, of course, Margaret continued. But we all thought you'd made a different choice? Evelyn supplied. Margaret blinked. Yes, I made exactly the choice I wanted to make, Evelyn said. He's a good man. He's honest and he's capable, and he treats me with respect. I find those things considerably more useful than the alternatives. The second woman, Frances Alcott, the banker's wife, who had always been kinder than Margaret, said, You seem very happy, Evelyn. Evelyn thought about the letter to her father, about the lamp burning low, about Jacob checking the numbers she had laid out and saying, quietly, You found something in a day that I've missed for 2 years. I am, she said, and meant it slightly more than she had expected. Jacob came out of the feed store to find his wife, surrounded by 3 women who were looking at her with the particular expressions of people who have just had a small revolution occur in their assumptions. He stopped beside Evelyn without interrupting. She introduced him simply. My husband. Jacob acknowledged the women with the brief courtesy of a man who is polite without being performative. They left shortly afterward. How often does that happen? He asked. When they were gone. People asking me why I made the choices I made. People acting like you owe them an explanation for your own life. Evelyn looked at him. Often enough that I stopped noticing it. You should notice it, Jacob said. It's worth noticing. She didn't answer that, but she thought about it for the rest of the morning. They had one more stop, the county records office, where Evelyn had decided to check something that she had been thinking about since the night before, specifically, whether there was any documented basis for the claim that Hartwell Supply's credit standing was uncertain, or whether Whitmore had created that impression entirely out of inference and rumor. It took 40 minutes, and a clerk named Henry, who was visibly uncomfortable with Evelyn's very direct questions. But by the end of it, she had what she needed. There was no documented basis. Whitmore had created it entirely, which meant he had done it through conversation, through suggestion, through the kind of carefully constructed reputation damage that left no paper trail. That was important, because it meant Evelyn could fight it the same way. Jacob waited outside while she worked, and when she came out with the information, she told him what she had found. He thought about it for a moment. "He's been doing this for 12 years, Jacob said. He knows how to keep his hands clean." "He does," Evelyn agreed. "But he's also been doing it for 12 years because no one has ever looked for the pattern. And we are, she confirmed. They mounted up and rode back toward the ranch, and the 12 miles felt shorter than it had the first time she had made that journey, less like crossing into unknown territory and more like going home. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern Evelyn was looking for began to emerge. She had written letters, careful, professionally worded letters, to 3 other businesses in the county that she knew had experienced difficulty in the past few years. Not asking about Whitmore directly, asking about their experiences with certain suppliers, certain financial institutions, certain arrangements that had appeared and then disappeared. The responses came back slowly and then all at once, and what they told her was worse than she had expected. The Cooper family, who had lost their dry goods store 2 years ago, had faced exactly the same sequence: supplier concerns raised without evidence, a credit dispute manufactured from nothing, then a quiet offer of assistance that came with conditions. They had accepted the conditions and lost their independence in every way that mattered. The Fielding mill had survived, but only by restructuring in a way that gave Whitmore's brother-in-law a stake in the operation. A woman named Ruth Carey, who had tried to run a boarding house on the west side of town, had been run out of business through a combination of rumor and a fabricated health complaint filed with the county. She was now living with her daughter 2 towns over. Evelyn read Ruth Carey's letter 3 times. She sat at the desk by the window, and for the first time in weeks she felt something close to rage. Not the anxious, reactive anger of someone who is afraid. The cold, focused anger of someone who has seen the full shape of something and is done pretending it is smaller than it is. She was still sitting there when Jacob came in from the afternoon's work. He read her face before he read the letters. "What happened?" he said. She told him, all of it. Jacob sat down across from her and read Ruth Carey's letter. He read it without expression, the way he read everything. But when he set it down, there was something in his jaw that hadn't been there before. "He destroyed a woman's business with a fake health complaint," he said. Yes, and the county accepted it. The county commissioner at the time was a man named Albrecht, who had a long-standing arrangement with Whitmore's water rights operation. Where is Albrecht now? Retired. The current commissioner is a man named Foster. Evelyn paused. "I don't know yet if Foster is his or not." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "You've been building a record," he said. "I've been building evidence," she said. "There's a difference. A record is just information. Evidence is information with a direction. What direction are you pointing it?" Evelyn looked at him steadily. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm going to find out what we can actually do with it. Legally, through channels that can't be dismissed or buried." "That might mean a lawyer," Jacob said. "It definitely means a lawyer," Evelyn said. "One who is not Preston." Jacob almost smiled. "Do you know one who isn't? I'm going to write to my father's contact in San Antonio. There's a man there, Oliver Marsh. He's handled land disputes before. He doesn't have connections in this county, which means he doesn't have anything Whitmore can use." Jacob nodded. "Do it," he said. She had already started writing. The reply from Oliver Marsh arrived 9 days later. In the intervening time, Whitmore made his second move. It came through the county tax assessor's office, a reclassification of a portion of the Hartwell supply warehouse property that, under the new assessment, would significantly increase the property taxes on that specific parcel. The reclassification cited a change in commercial use determination that was, on paper, entirely bureaucratic. There was no name attached to the decision. There never was. Gerald brought the notice to Evelyn in person, riding out to the ranch for the first time since the wedding. He was managing to look calm, which Evelyn knew cost him something. "This came Tuesday," he said, and handed her the notice. She read it. Jacob read it over her shoulder. "That's a 40% increase on the warehouse parcel," Jacob said. 60%, if you factor in the adjacent lot that's under the same assessment, Evelyn said. "He's trying to make it financially impossible to hold the property without selling." "Can he do this?" Gerald asked. "The assessor's office technically can reclassify," Evelyn said. "The question is whether the reclassification is defensible. If I can prove it was made without legitimate Can you prove that?" "Not yet." She set the notice down. "But I have 9 days before the payment deadline. And I'm going to spend 7 of them finding out who made this decision and why." Gerald looked at Jacob. "Does she always do this?" he asked. "I've known her 3 weeks longer than I knew her before," Jacob said. "I believe so." Gerald shook his head slowly. And there was something in his expression that was not worry anymore. It was something closer to pride, carefully restrained. "Your mother was the same way," he told Evelyn. "I never told you that enough." Evelyn looked at her father for a moment. "You're telling me now," she said. "That's enough." Oliver Marsh's letter arrived the day after Gerald's visit, and it changed everything. Not because of what Marsh said directly. His initial response was careful and professional, and, primarily, expressed interest in understanding the situation before committing to anything. But buried in the third paragraph was a sentence that Evelyn read twice, then set down, then picked up and read a third time. Marsh had written, "I am familiar with Charles Whitmore's operations in that county. As his name arose in a related matter I handled 2 years ago, involving a disputed land transfer in the adjacent jurisdiction, he had seen this before. Not just heard of it. He had encountered Whitmore's methods in a documented legal context. That meant there was a thread that existed somewhere in a legal record, in a jurisdiction where Whitmore's local influence did not extend." Evelyn wrote back to Marsh the same afternoon. Her letter was 12 pages. She included copies of everything she had gathered, the supplier letters, the response from the Cooper family, Ruth Carey's account, the tax reclassification notice. She asked Marsh directly whether the matter he had handled 2 years ago bore any relationship to what she was describing, and if so, whether he would be willing to travel to Willow Creek to examine the situation in person. She sealed the envelope and handed it to Jacob without explanation. He looked at it, then at her. "You want me to take this to town," he said. "I want to make sure it goes directly to the post, not through anyone who might decide it's interesting," she said. Jacob took the envelope. He was back by noon. When he came in, he set his hat on the table and said, "Preston was at the post office." Evelyn went still. "Did he see you?" "He saw me put a letter in the box," Jacob said. "He doesn't know who it was to." "He'll find out," Evelyn said. "Maybe," Jacob said, "maybe not." He paused. "He might think it's the supply order correspondence. I've been sending letters about the fall cattle arrangements." Evelyn thought about it. "We need to move faster," she said. "I know," Jacob said. "If Whitmore realizes we're building a legal case, he won't wait. He'll escalate before we're ready. Then we need to be ready before he does." They looked at each other across the kitchen. It was the clearest moment of partnership Evelyn had felt since she had arrived at his fence line with a proposal that had seemed, at the time, like the most desperate thing she had ever done. Now standing in his kitchen with a legal letter in transit and a tax reclassification deadline approaching, it seemed like exactly the right decision. "There's something else," Jacob said. His voice had a different quality. Evelyn recognized it, the tone he used when something was bothering him, and he had been carrying it for a while before deciding to say it. "Tell me," she said. "The Pattersons came by this morning, while you were writing the letter. Daniel Patterson. He wanted to thank you for the grain." "That's not the something else," Evelyn said. "No," Jacob said. "The something else is what he told me while he was here. He said that 2 days ago, Whitmore's man came out to their place and offered them a water arrangement. Better terms than they currently have. Evelyn understood immediately. He's building alliances, pulling the smaller ranches toward him before we can talk to them. He's doing it fast, Jacob said. The Pattersons said there were 2 other ranchers who got the same visit last week. Did Patterson take the offer? He said he didn't give an answer. He needs to not take it, Evelyn said. I told him that, Jacob said. I told him to wait. He trusts me, but he also has a sick wife and a bad season, and the offer Whitmore made is genuinely better than what he has. Jacob paused. I can't ask him to hold out indefinitely on trust alone. This was the problem beneath the problem. It wasn't just about Evelyn and Jacob and the Hartwell supply business. Whitmore was moving against the entire community, offering just enough to the people who were struggling that they would make the rational, individual choice, even if the collective outcome was controlled by one man. It was sophisticated, it was deliberate, and it was working. How long does Patterson have before he needs to answer? Evelyn asked. A week, maybe 2. Then I need to talk to him, Evelyn said. Not about waiting, about why his long-term interest is different from his short-term interest. He's not a man who responds well to lectures, Jacob said. I'm not going to lecture him, Evelyn said. I'm going to show him the numbers. Jacob looked at her. What numbers? The numbers that show what happened to every family that accepted Whitmore's assistance over the past 12 years, Evelyn said. The Coopers, the Fieldings, the Carey boarding house. What they had before, what they had after. She paused. Once you see what happens to the people who say yes to him, the short-term calculation changes. Jacob was quiet for a moment. When do you want to go? He asked. Tomorrow, Evelyn said. I'll come with you, Jacob said. She started to say she could handle it alone. Then she stopped, not because she needed Jacob there, but because she had begun to understand something about this arrangement that she hadn't anticipated when she had ridden to his fence line with her rehearsed speech and her desperate logic. She didn't want to do it alone. That was new. That was not something she had felt in a very long time. And feeling it was strange in a way she did not entirely know what to do with. Thank you, she said. The visit to the Patterson ranch changed something. Not immediately. Daniel Patterson was a cautious man, and cautious men don't shift positions quickly even when presented with compelling information. But he listened. He listened with the complete serious attention of someone who knows the stakes are real. And when Evelyn laid out what had happened to the Cooper family in specific, documented detail, not generalities, she watched him go very still. They lost everything, he said. They lost the store, Evelyn said. Margaret Cooper is working as a seamstress in Abilene. They had that business for 16 years and the Fieldings. Still operating, Evelyn said. But they answer to Whitmore's brother-in-law on every major decision. Davis Fielding told me himself that he has to send reports on his yield and his debts and his staffing decisions to a man in San Antonio who he's never met. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Why are you telling me this? He said. What do you want from me? Nothing yet, Evelyn said. When the time comes, I might ask you to talk to people, to share what you know about how Whitmore operates. That's all. That's not a small thing, Patterson said. I know, Evelyn said. I'm not pretending it is. Patterson looked at Jacob. You know what you got yourself into when you married her? He said. Jacob said, I had a reasonable idea, and you're still here. I'm still here, Jacob said. Patterson looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at Evelyn. Give me 2 weeks, he said. Don't ask me to commit to anything yet. But give me 2 weeks. That's all I'm asking, Evelyn said. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon. Side by side, and for a long stretch neither of them spoke. There was something companionable about the silence that Evelyn hadn't expected to feel so soon. She was used to silences that were waiting for her to fill them. Silences that required management. Jacob's silences required nothing. They just existed, and she could exist inside them without performing. It was a strange kind of relief. You did well back there, Jacob said. Eventually, he didn't commit to anything, Evelyn said. He didn't take Whitmore's offer either, Jacob said. That's more than he was going to do this morning. She thought about that. Do you think he'll hold? She asked. Jacob was quiet for a moment. "I think Daniel Patterson is a good man in a hard situation," he said. "And I think good men in hard situations make better decisions when they feel like they're not alone in making them." Something in Evelyn went very quiet. She thought about that sentence for a long time. She was still thinking about it when they got back to the ranch, and she went inside to light the lamp, and he went to check the barn twice. Methodically, the way he always did. She was thinking about it when she sat at the desk by the window and opened the account ledger to the page she had marked the night before. Good men in hard situations make better decisions when they feel like they're not alone. He hadn't meant it about her. He had been talking about Patterson. But sitting in the lamplight, with the ledger open, and the account figures that were slowly, carefully beginning to stabilize because of her work, because of Jacob's willingness to let her work, because of an arrangement that had started as desperation and was becoming something she could not yet name, Evelyn thought. That applies to more than Patterson. She had been alone in this for 4 months. She was not alone anymore. She was still sitting with that thought when Jacob came back inside, went to the kitchen, and put the kettle on, without asking whether she wanted tea. He had noticed, sometime in the past 3 weeks, that she drank tea in the evenings rather than coffee. He hadn't said anything about it. He just put the kettle on. Evelyn looked at the back of his head and felt something shift in her chest that she was not prepared to examine too closely. Not yet. There was too much work to do, too much threat still unresolved, too much that could still go wrong. But the shift happened anyway, regardless of what she was prepared for. And when Jacob set the cup on the desk beside her account ledger and went to sit in his chair without making anything of it, she wrapped both hands around the warmth of it and thought, "I do not know what this is becoming, but I am not afraid of it." She turned back to the ledger. She had 2 weeks before Patterson needed an answer, and an unknown number of days before Whitmore realized what she was building. She intended to use every one of them. Outside, the Texas dark pressed against the window. Inside, the lamp burned steady and the tea was warm and across the room. Jacob Dawson opened the supply inventory and began quietly checking figures she had asked him to verify 2 days ago. Neither of them said anything, but they were both working. And that, Evelyn thought, turning the page of the ledger, was its own kind of answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. Oliver Marsh arrived on a Thursday. Evelyn had not told anyone he was coming except Jacob and her father, and even then she had kept the details sparse, not because she didn't trust them, but because she had learned, in the past several weeks, that information in Willow Creek had a way of traveling in directions nobody intended. She had started treating everything she knew as something that needed to be protected until the moment it was useful. Marsh was a compact man in his late 50s, with a precise mustache and the kind of eyes that moved quickly and missed nothing. He arrived on the afternoon stage from San Antonio, carrying a leather case that Evelyn suspected contained more documentation than most lawyers accumulated in a year, and he greeted her outside Hartwell Supply with the brisk efficiency of someone who had decided, before arriving, that he respected the person he was meeting. "Your letters were thorough," he said, shaking her hand. "I didn't want to waste your time," Evelyn said. "You didn't." He glanced past her to where Jacob had dismounted and was tying the horses. "This is your husband, Jacob Dawson," Jacob said, stepping forward. Marsh shook his hand, assessed him in the quick way he assessed everything, and then turned back to Evelyn. "Shall we talk inside?" They spent 2 hours at the back table of Hartwell Supply, with Gerald keeping the front of the store and the door closed. Marsh went through what he had. The related matter he had mentioned in his letter, the land transfer dispute 2 jurisdictions over, had involved a Whitmore-connected holding company that had acquired property through a sequence of financial pressures, remarkably similar to what was happening to Hartwell Supply. That case had settled quietly, which meant there was no public record. But there were documents, legal correspondence, a chain of events that, laid alongside what Evelyn had gathered, formed something more than a pattern. It formed a method. "He does this the same way every time," Marsh said. "Because it has worked every time. The consistency is actually his vulnerability. If we can demonstrate that the same approach has been applied systematically across multiple parties and connect the common thread to Whitmore directly, not just to his intermediaries, we have the basis for a complaint to the State Commerce Board. Will the State Commerce Board act on it? Evelyn asked. That depends on the evidence, Marsh said. What you have is suggestive. What I have from the prior matter adds documentation. But we need one more thing. What? Jacob said. Marsh looked at him. We need someone who accepted Whitmore's assistance, Marsh said. Someone who can testify, from direct experience, to the conditions that assistance came with. The Cooper family, the Fielding Mill, one of them needs to be willing to speak. Silence settled over the table. Evelyn thought about Margaret Cooper sewing in Abilene. She thought about Davis Fielding, who had spoken to her in whispered sentences and then looked over his shoulder when he was done. Those people are afraid, Jacob said. They have reason to be. I know, Marsh said. I'm not minimizing that. I'm telling you what we need. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Give me time." Marsh nodded. How much time? He asked. A week, she said. Maybe less. She wrote to Margaret Cooper that evening. Not a letter full of legal language or strategy. A letter that said, I know what happened to your family. I know it was not your fault. I know you have been carrying the weight of something that was done to you. And I know that speaking about it feels impossible. But you are not alone in this anymore, and if you are willing to help, I believe we can stop him from doing it to anyone else. She wrote it 3 times before she got it right. Jacob read it without being asked. She had left it on the table while she went to refill the kettle, and when she came back, he had finished reading it. It's honest, he said. Is it too much? She asked. He shook his head. It's exactly enough. She sealed the envelope and put it with the mail for the next morning. Then she sat in the chair across from Jacob, the chair she had started sitting in naturally. Without thinking about it, the way you stop noticing a door once it's been open long enough, and said, Marsh thinks we have a chance. Do you think we have a chance? Jacob said. I think we have more of a chance than we had 6 weeks ago, she said. Which was essentially none. That's a long way from a guarantee. Yes, she said. It is. Jacob looked at her across the table. Are you scared? He asked. It was a direct question, the kind he asked when he had decided something needed to be said plainly. She had come to recognize the quality of those questions. He never asked them to be intrusive. He asked them because he thought the answer mattered. Yes, she said. Not for myself, for my father. If this goes wrong, if Whitmore decides he's done being subtle and comes after the store directly, Papa doesn't have the health to survive it. I know, Jacob said. And I'm scared because we're asking people who have already been hurt to put themselves at risk again, she said. Margaret Cooper didn't choose this fight. She lost it and moved on with her life. Asking her to come back into it is the only way to win, Jacob said. That doesn't make it easier to ask. No, he said. It doesn't. He paused. But you're not asking her to do something you wouldn't do yourself. She'll know that from the letter. Evelyn looked at him. You read people carefully, she said. I've had a lot of time alone to practice, Jacob said. There was something in that sentence, the plain acknowledgement of the years of quiet, said without self-pity and without deflection, that reached in Evelyn's chest and held. She didn't look away from him, and he didn't look away from her. And it lasted only a moment, but it was the kind of moment that doesn't disappear when it ends. We should sleep, she said finally. Marsh wants to meet again tomorrow morning. Jacob nodded and pushed back from the table. Evelyn, he said, when he reached the door to his room. She looked up. Whatever happens, he said, you made the right call. Coming out here, asking. All of it. She didn't know what to do with that. So she simply said, so did you. He went inside. She sat at the table for a while longer, in the quiet of the lamplight, and thought about what they were walking into. The next morning brought trouble before Marsh arrived. It came in the form of a man named Grady Cole, who was one of Whitmore's more visible associates, not a lawyer like Preston, but a practical man who handled the kind of tasks that lawyers preferred not to be directly connected with. He rode up to Hartwell Supply before it opened, tied his horse, and sat on the bench outside with the patient, deliberate air of someone who wants to be seen. Gerald saw him from the upstairs window and sent word to Evelyn immediately. She was there within the hour, with Jacob beside her. Cole stood when they approached. He was a large man with a pleasant face that did not match his work, and he greeted Evelyn with a smile that was technically civil and practically threatening. "Mrs. Dawson," he said. "Been hoping to run into you, Mr. Cole," Evelyn said. "What can I do for you?" "Whitmore wanted me to let you know that the tax assessment situation, the warehouse reclassification, that something he might be able to help with," Cole said. "He has relationships with the assessor's office. He thought perhaps you might want to discuss an arrangement." Jacob had not said a word. He was standing slightly behind Evelyn and to the left, and Cole had glanced at him twice, in a way that was supposed to look casual. "Tell Mr. Whitmore I appreciate his concern," Evelyn said. "The assessment is under review, and I expect it to be resolved through the appropriate channels." Cole's smile didn't change. "These things can take time," he said. "The deadline is coming up. Wouldn't want your father to have trouble with the property." "My father's property is in excellent order," Evelyn said. "Thank you for stopping by." Cole looked at her for a moment. Then at Jacob Dawson he said, "You're a reasonable man. You understand how business works in this county." "I understand exactly how business works in this county," Jacob said. "That's why I'm standing here instead of sitting down to discuss arrangements." Cole's smile thinned slightly at the edges. "All right then," he said pleasantly. "Good day." He untied his horse and rode off. Evelyn waited until he was around the corner before she exhaled. "He'll report that we refused," she said. "He'll report that we refused," calmly, Jacob said. "That matters." "How?" "Because Whitmore expected us to be rattled," Jacob said. "Cole came here to see how rattled we were. If we'd been rattled, it would have told Whitmore he was winning. Now he knows we're not. Does that make us safer or less safe?" Evelyn said. Jacob thought about it honestly. "Both," he said. "Less safe because he'll escalate. Safer because he knows he can't just apply quiet pressure and wait for us to fold." "That's a terrible kind of safer," Evelyn said. "Yes," Jacob agreed, "it is." They went inside to wait for Marsh. Marsh arrived 20 minutes later and listened to the Cole account with the focused attention of a man who is collecting evidence rather than hearing a story. "He came in person," Marsh said. "Not through Preston." "Yes," Evelyn said. "That's a change," Marsh said. "He usually stays at 2 removes from direct contact. The fact that he sent Cole directly means he's feeling pressure." "What kind of pressure?" Jacob asked. "The kind that comes from not being able to predict the opposition," Marsh said. "You haven't responded the way he expected. He expected you to be isolated, a woman alone. A store in trouble. Instead you married, and the man you married is not controllable. And you're clearly still operating." He paused. "He sent Cole to remind you that he can help, which means he'd prefer a settlement to a fight. He'd prefer to absorb us quietly rather than destroy us loudly," Evelyn said. "Exactly," Marsh said. "Loud destruction draws attention. He doesn't want attention. Then we need to become louder," Evelyn said. Both men looked at her. "Not recklessly," she said. "But we need Whitmore to understand that the cost of continuing to pressure us is higher than the cost of leaving us alone. Right now he thinks we're an inconvenience he can manage. We need to become a risk he can't afford. To do that," Marsh said, "we need the testimony." "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm working on it." Margaret Cooper's reply came 4 days later. In those 4 days, 3 things happened. The first was that Daniel Patterson sent word that he had declined Whitmore's water arrangement offer. His message was brief 4 lines, delivered through Jacob's hand, and said only that he had thought about what Evelyn had shown him and decided he didn't like the company. A yes would put him in. Evelyn read it twice and felt something warm and solid settle in her chest. The second was that Whitmore's intermediary filed a formal complaint with the county board about an alleged discrepancy in Hartwell Supply's business license, records a discrepancy that Evelyn was fairly certain had been manufactured, and that would require a formal response within 30 days. The third was that Jacob came home from checking the eastern pasture with a cut on his forearm and a carefully controlled expression that told Evelyn something had happened, that he was deciding how to tell her. "What happened?" she said, the moment he came through the door. "Someone cut the fence," he said. "Eastern line. 3 of the cattle got through before I caught it." She looked at his arm. "How did you barbed wire?" "Getting them back." He moved to the basin and started washing the cut with the matter-of-fact efficiency he brought to everything. "It could be random, but you don't think it is," Evelyn said. "No," he said, "I don't." She crossed the kitchen and took the cloth from his hands without asking and pressed it against the cut firmly. Jacob went still. She had not touched him with anything but practical necessity since the wedding, a brush of hands when passing something. The ordinary contact of shared living. This was different. She was close to him, close enough that she could feel the tension in his arm under her hand. Close enough to be aware, in a way that she usually kept carefully managed, of the particular reality of standing next to Jacob Dawson. She pressed the cloth and didn't look up from the cut. "This isn't going to stop," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't. He's moving against the ranch now," she said. "Not just the store. It was only a matter of time," Jacob said. "He's done with subtlety." She tied the cloth off and stepped back. And when she looked up at his face, he was watching her with an expression she had not seen from him before, something careful and quiet and very direct that she didn't entirely know what to do with. "I knew what I was walking into when I said yes," he said. "I want you to know that. This," he gestured at his arm, "this doesn't change anything for me." "Jacob, I'm not telling you that so you'll feel better," he said. "I'm telling you because I think you've been worried that bringing this to my door was a mistake. And it wasn't." She looked at him. "You can't know that yet," she said. "Not until we know how this ends." "I know it regardless of how it ends," he said. "That's what I'm telling you." They stood in the kitchen, close enough that the conversation felt larger than the words it was built from, and Evelyn held his gaze for a moment longer than she intended to. Then Margaret Cooper's letter arrived and saved her from whatever she had been about to say. It came with the afternoon mail, hand-delivered by a boy from the post office who was slightly out of breath from running. Evelyn opened it at the desk. It was 2 pages. Margaret Cooper wrote in a precise, careful hand that Evelyn recognized immediately as the handwriting of someone who had been taught to be exact, because exactness was the one thing they could control. The letter said, "I have thought about writing this kind of letter for 2 years. I have started it a dozen times and destroyed what I wrote because I was afraid. I am still afraid. But you said something in your letter that I have not stopped thinking about, which is that you were asking me to do something you would do yourself. I believe that is true, so I will try," she went on. What followed was 12 paragraphs of precise, documented testimony, the sequence by which Whitmore's pressure had been applied to the Cooper store, the specific conditions attached to the offer of assistance, the legal language that had transferred effective control of their business to a Whitmore-connected holding company before they fully understood what they had signed. She named names, she cited dates, she described conversations. It was exactly what Marsh had said they needed. When Evelyn finished reading, she sat very still for a moment. Then she stood and went to the door. "Jacob," she said. He was on the porch, checking the fence supplies. "Come read this," she said. He read it standing up, which was how he read everything that mattered, not sitting back in a chair but on his feet, as though he might need to move at any moment. When he was done, he set the letter down. "She's brave," he said. Evelyn said, "Are you going to take this to Marsh today?" "I'm riding into town right now," she said. "I'll saddle the horses," he said. Marsh read Margaret Cooper's letter with the focused quiet of a man who has been waiting for a specific piece to arrive and is now determining whether it fits. It fit. "This is the documentation we needed," he said. "Combined with what I have from the prior case and what you've gathered from the others, the Patterson and Fielding accounts, the tax reclassification, the license complaint, this is enough to file with the State Commerce Board." "How long does the filing process take?" Evelyn asked. "The initial complaint can be filed within a week," Marsh said. "A formal investigation could take months." But the filing itself, the moment it becomes a matter of state record, changes the situation immediately. Because it becomes public, Jacob said. Because it becomes public, Marsh confirmed. Whitmore's method depends entirely on invisibility. Every action he takes is designed to look like unrelated, coincidental business activity. A state commerce complaint names him directly and creates a formal record that connects the incidents. That's precisely what he has spent 12 years avoiding. So when he finds out we've filed, Evelyn began. He will accelerate, Marsh said. Before the filing, he was pressuring you. After the filing, he will do everything he can to discredit you. The testimony, and me personally before the investigation gets traction. Can he discredit the testimony? He will try to discredit Margaret Cooper, Marsh said. He will say the settlement she signed was voluntary and fully understood. He will produce Preston to testify to the legitimacy of the process. He paused. That's why I need you to contact the Fielding family as well. One testimony is vulnerable. Two is a pattern. With two documented witnesses and the connecting evidence from the prior case, the discrediting becomes much more difficult. Evelyn thought of Davis Fielding, whispering and looking over his shoulder. I'll write tonight, she said. There's something else you need to know, Marsh said. And his voice shifted slightly, becoming more careful. Both Evelyn and Jacob looked at him. In preparing the complaint documentation, Marsh said, I went back through the county property records. I was looking for the holding company structure Whitmore uses to acquire businesses. He paused. I found something that wasn't in anything you gave me. What? Evelyn said. Marsh opened his leather case and took out a folded document. This is a deed transfer filed 14 months ago, he said. Before you married, before any of the current pressure began. It's a transfer of a portion of the water rights in this valley, specifically the tributary that feeds the eastern portion of Jacob's ranch. Jacob went very still. Those water rights were held by an independent surveyor's trust, Marsh continued. This transfer moved them to a holding company called Valley Land Management. Whitmore, Jacob said. The holding company traces back to him, yes, Marsh said. He's been sitting on those rights for over a year. He hasn't acted on them. Because he was waiting, Evelyn said. Understanding arriving like cold water. He wasn't just pressuring the store. He was positioning. He wanted enough leverage over both of us, the store and the ranch, before he moved. If he calls those water rights, Jacob said slowly, the eastern pasture is unusable by summer, which means the cattle operation loses roughly 40% of its grazing capacity, Evelyn said. Yes, Marsh said. The room was very quiet. Jacob looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at the deed transfer in Marsh's hands. He planned this before we married, she said. He was already moving against both of us separately. We just combined the targets, Jacob said. And he still has the play ready. When can he use it? Evelyn asked Marsh. The water rights transfer gives him the legal basis to restrict access at the start of the next seasonal cycle, Marsh said. That's 2 months from now. 2 months. Then we have 2 months to make the state commerce complaint loud enough that using those water rights becomes a liability instead of a weapon, Evelyn said. That's the goal, Marsh said. But Evelyn, you need to understand that when we file this complaint, everything you've been managing quietly becomes public. Your name will be on it. Jacob's name will be on it. Whitmore will know exactly who is coming for him, and he will have 2 months to respond. He already knows, Evelyn said. Not like this, Marsh said. Right now he thinks you're defending. When we file, he'll know you're attacking. Evelyn looked at Jacob. Jacob looked at her. In 8 weeks of marriage, they had not made a major decision. Without this moment, the checking, the weighing, the unspoken question of whether they were still standing in the same direction. They were, Evelyn said. Marsh nodded once. I'll need 3 more days to complete the documentation, he said. There's one more piece I need before we're ready. What piece? Jacob asked. I need the tax reclassification order reviewed by an independent assessor, Marsh said. Someone who can testify that the reclassification had no legitimate basis. Do you know anyone in the county who would? No, Evelyn said. No one in this county who could do it without being pressured afterward. The next county? Jacob said. Evelyn thought. There's a man in Carver County, she said. Henry Birch. He did the original assessment on the Hartwell warehouse property 6 years ago. He's retired now, but he's honest and he doesn't owe anything to anyone in this jurisdiction. Can you reach him? I can ride out tomorrow, Evelyn said. I'll go with you, Jacob said. Carver County is 3 hours each way, she said. I know, he said. I've been there. She looked at him for a moment. All right, she said. They left Marsh at Hartwell Supply with Gerald, who had listened to everything from the back of the room, with the focused stillness of a man absorbing the full scopes of something he had only partially understood before. At the door, Gerald caught Evelyn's arm. Evelyn, he said quietly. She turned. He looked at her for a moment at the steadiness in her face, the clarity in her eyes, the way she stood like a woman who has found the ground under her feet. Your mother would have done exactly this, he said. Exactly. Evelyn put her hand over his. I know, she said. You told me enough about her that I know. She went out into the afternoon. Jacob was already holding her horse. They rode to Carver County at sunrise. 3 hours out, 3 hours back, with whatever time the conversation with Henry Birch required in the middle. It was a long day, and they spent much of the outward journey in the quiet that had become familiar between them. Not the silence of distance, but the silence of two people who have stopped needing to fill space. About an hour out, Jacob said, Tell me about your mother. Evelyn looked at him. You don't have to, he said quickly. Your father mentioned her. And I thought no, Evelyn said. I want to. She talked for the next 30 minutes. About Caroline Hartwell, who had died when Evelyn was 12 of fever, quickly, and without much warning, the way people died in 1871. About the way her mother had kept the store's accounts before Evelyn was old enough to do it, and how Gerald had said she had a gift for numbers that Evelyn had inherited. About the way Caroline had handled difficult customers not by deferring, but by finding the one thing they actually needed beneath the thing they were asking for, and addressing that instead. She sounds like you, Jacob said. She sounds like someone I'm trying to be, Evelyn said. There's not much difference, Jacob said. She looked at him. He was looking at the road ahead, which was how he usually delivered the things he meant most. What about your family? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. My brother James died 6 years ago, he said. Fever. Like your mother. My parents both died before I came out here. I came to Texas because I needed somewhere that was entirely new. Did it work? She asked. Mostly, he said. The somewhere new helped. The entirely new took longer. She thought about what that meant. 8 years of the ranch. Building something from the ground up, in a place where no one knew what he had left behind. A chosen silence, a chosen emptiness. Do you miss him? She asked. Every day, Jacob said simply. They rode for a while in quiet that had a different quality now, not empty but full. Weighted with things said and unsaid, with the particular intimacy of two people who have begun to allow each other into the rooms they usually keep closed. I'm glad you said yes, Evelyn said finally. Jacob turned to look at her. It was the first time she had said anything like it, and she had not entirely planned to, but she had meant it completely, without condition or reservation, and when she looked at his face, she saw something there that she was fairly certain she would think about for a very long time. So am I, he said. Henry Birch lived in a house outside the town of Carver and was 80 years old and deeply suspicious of visitors, which Evelyn had expected. What she had not expected was how quickly he warmed when she laid out the tax reclassification documents and he looked at them through his spectacles. This is wrong, he said, within 3 minutes. Technically. Or fraudulently? She asked. Both, he said. The assessment criteria applied here haven't been valid since 1881. Whoever approved this either doesn't know the law or is pretending they don't. Would you be willing to say that in writing? Evelyn asked. Birch looked at her over his spectacles. Young woman, he said. I spent 40 years making accurate assessments in this state. Someone using my prior work as a baseline for a fraudulent reclassification is an insult to everything I did correctly. He picked up his pen. I'll have the written opinion ready before you leave. Jacob caught Evelyn's eye across the table. She caught his. Between them passed something quick and certain and entirely without words. The ride back was easier than the ride out. They had what they needed. Marsh could file, and when he did, Charles Whitmore was going to discover that the quiet woman who had ridden to a lonely rancher's fence line with a desperate proposal was considerably more dangerous than he had ever accounted for. They reached the ranch as the last light faded. Jacob took the horses. Evelyn went inside, lit the lamp, and sat at the desk. She opened the ledger to the current page. The accounts were holding. The testimony was secured. The independent assessment was in her saddlebag. In 3 days, Marsh would file, and then everything would change. She pressed her hand flat against the open ledger and felt the solidness of the desk beneath it. Solidness of the house around her, the solidness of what she and Jacob had built in 8 weeks from an arrangement that had started as the most desperate gamble of her life. Outside, she could hear Jacob closing up the barn. She did not need to count to know he would check it twice. Some things she had learned, you stop waiting to learn and simply come to know. Marsh filed the complaint on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, Whitmore knew. Evelyn had expected it to take longer, had hoped for a few more days of quiet before the response came. But Whitmore had people inside the State Commerce Board's receiving office, or close enough to it that the difference didn't matter. And by Thursday afternoon, Preston was sitting in the front room of Hartwell Supply with his hat on his knee and his imported tobacco smell filling the space, waiting for Evelyn with the particular patience of a man who has been told to wait and intends to make the waiting itself feel threatening. She did not make him wait long. She came in from the back, stood across the counter from him, and said, "Mr. Preston." "Mrs. Dawson," he said, with the smooth civility that she had come to understand was his version of a warning. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to come by personally. He's deeply concerned about certain filings that appear to have been made with the State Commerce Board." "I'm sure he is," Evelyn said. Preston's smile held its shape with some effort. He feels there may have been a misunderstanding about the nature of the business relationships involved. He would like the opportunity to clarify those relationships before any formal investigation proceeds. "There's nothing to clarify," Evelyn said. "The complaint speaks for itself." "The complaint," Preston said carefully, "contains testimony from individuals who may have misremembered or mischaracterized certain voluntary arrangements. Mr. Whitmore is prepared to provide documentation demonstrating the fully consensual nature of every transaction involved. Then he can provide that documentation to the Commerce Board's investigators," Evelyn said. "That's exactly what the process is designed for." Preston looked at her for a long moment. The smile was gone now. Not replaced by anything hostile, Whitmore's men were too disciplined for open hostility when they could still use the language of civility. But the pretense of friendliness had finally become too much effort to maintain. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "I have known Charles Whitmore for 15 years. I have watched him deal with a great many situations. I want to say this to you sincerely, and I hope you will hear it in that spirit." He paused. "You have created something that cannot be easily undone. Whatever outcome you are hoping for from this complaint, I am asking you to consider whether that outcome is worth what the process will cost you." "I have considered it," Evelyn said. "At length. Is my father's store," she said. "Not Mr. Whitmore's, not yours, and it will remain so." Preston stood. "Good day, Mrs. Dawson," he said. He left. Evelyn stood at the counter for a moment after the door closed, her hands flat on the wood, breathing carefully. Gerald came through from the back. "I heard," he said. She said, "Are you all right?" She thought about it honestly. The way Jacob had taught her, not the reflexive yes that her instinct produced, but the actual answer. "I'm frightened," she said. "And I'm not going to let that stop me." Gerald put his hand over hers on the counter. "That's your mother exactly," he said. Jacob heard about Preston's visit when Evelyn rode back to the ranch that evening, and something in his jaw tightened in the way she had come to recognize as controlled anger. "He threatened the store directly," Jacob said. "He was careful not to threaten anything specific," Evelyn said. "But yes, that was the message." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "He came to you alone," he said. While I was at the ranch. He timed it, Evelyn agreed. He wanted to talk to me without you there, because he thought you'd be easier alone. Yes, she said. He was wrong about that. Jacob looked at her. I know, he said. But I don't like it. There was something in the plainness of that statement, I don't like it, that was more protective than any dramatic declaration would have been. He wasn't performing concern. He was stating a fact about how he felt. In the direct way he stated all facts, and somehow that made it land harder than anything louder would have. Marsh said to expect escalation, Evelyn said. Marsh was right, Jacob said. What's next? The Commerce Board will send a formal notice to Whitmore within 10 days, Evelyn said. That gives him 10 days to decide how to respond publicly. Marsh thinks he'll try one of two things, either challenge the standing of the witnesses, or attempt to demonstrate that the filing was made in bad faith. Can he do either? He can try, Evelyn said. Margaret Cooper's testimony is solid. Henry Birch's assessment opinion is signed and documented. The prior case Marsh handled creates the pattern. She paused. His best move is to go after Marsh. What do you mean? Challenge Marsh's credentials. His connection to the prior case suggests he has a personal grievance against Whitmore. If he can make the filing look like a legal vendetta rather than a legitimate complaint, he shifts the story, Jacob said. He shifts the story, Evelyn confirmed. And in this county, where he controls enough of the narrative that people already know to look the other way, if the story becomes about a lawyer with a grudge instead of a pattern of business fraud, people will find it easier to believe. Then we need to control the story ourselves, Jacob said. That's what I've been thinking, Evelyn said. She had been thinking about it for the past 3 hours. In fact, and the shape of what she needed to do had been forming in the back of her mind since Preston had walked out of Hartwell Supply. We need to talk to people, she said. Not through letters. Not through legal filings. In person. The families who were affected. The ranchers Patterson told us about. The businesses in town who have been watching Whitmore operate for a decade and keeping quiet because they thought they were alone. She paused. They need to know they're not alone. And they need to know it before Whitmore has a chance to reshape the narrative. Jacob looked at her. That's going to take more than the two of us, he said. Yes, Evelyn said, it is. Who do you trust? Jacob asked. Evelyn thought. Clara Webb, she said. The school teacher. She knows everyone in this community, and people trust her because she has no financial stake in any of this. She paused. And Frances Alcott. Jacob raised an eyebrow slightly. The banker's wife. Her husband has been uncomfortable with Whitmore's influence in the county bank for 3 years, Evelyn said. He can't say that openly, but Frances can talk to people in ways her husband can't. And Patterson, Jacob said. Patterson has already started, Evelyn said. He told me yesterday that he'd spoken to 2 of the ranchers who received Whitmore's water arrangement offer. Neither of them has accepted. Jacob sat back. So we have 3 days before Preston starts building his counter-narrative, he said. And we need to have enough people already talking to each other that when he does, there's something for the truth to hold on to. Yes, Evelyn said. All right, Jacob said. Who do we start with tomorrow? She pulled out the list she had made on the ride home. He leaned across the table and read it with her. The next 5 days were unlike anything Evelyn had ever lived through. She and Jacob rode out every morning before 7, splitting the list between them when necessary, together when possible. Evelyn talked to the women, the wives, who knew things their husbands had been afraid to say, the business owners who had kept their concerns buried under the daily work of staying solvent. Jacob talked to the ranchers, the men who responded to plain speaking and respected someone who had already been shown they weren't afraid of Whitmore. Clara Webb turned out to be more than Evelyn had hoped. She was a small woman with iron gray hair and the particular authority of someone who has spent 30 years shaping how a community thinks. And when Evelyn laid out what was happening, Clara listened without interrupting and then said, I've been waiting for someone to do this for 8 years. Why didn't you? Evelyn began. Because doing it alone would have just made me the next target, Clara said. You need enough people moving at the same time that he can't pick you off one by one. She paused. You have that now? I think so, Evelyn said. Then tell me what to do, Francis Alcott cried. Not from fear, but from something closer to relief. The way people cry when they have been carrying something alone for so long, that finally having someone to put it down with them is almost overwhelming. She told Evelyn that her husband had been sick about the bank's relationship with Whitmore's holding companies for 2 years. That he had wanted to say something, but couldn't risk what it would do to the bank's charter. That he had felt trapped and complicit and deeply ashamed. He's not the only one who has felt that way, Evelyn said. That's exactly the point. He made everyone feel like they were alone in it. What can my husband do? Francis asked. For now, nothing official, Evelyn said. But if it comes to a formal hearing, if the Commerce Board's investigation proceeds to the stage, where testimony is taken in account of the financial patterns from inside the county bank, would be significant. I'll talk to him, Francis said. When Evelyn reported this to Jacob that evening, he was quiet for a moment. The banker, he said. If the banker testifies, Whitmore can't dismiss it as a grudge, Evelyn finished. A man with financial exposure testifying against him is a different kind of evidence from an angry woman or a struggling rancher. Whitmore will go after him, Jacob said. I know, Evelyn said. I told Francis that. And? She said her husband has been sick with guilt for 2 years, Evelyn said. She said he'd rather be sick with fear over something he actually did than sick with shame over something he allowed. Jacob looked at her. You're something else, he said quietly. It was not the kind of compliment that came with decoration or fanfare. He said it the way he said, everything that mattered simply, directly, as a statement of fact. And it hit her the same way it always did when he was simply, directly honest with her. We're not done yet, she said. No, he said, but we're close. The twist came on the 6th day, and it came from a direction Evelyn had not prepared for. She was at Hartwell Supply, going through a shipment verification with Gerald. When Davis Fielding walked in, she had written to Fielding 3 weeks ago. He had not replied. She had written again more carefully, more specifically, laying out exactly what she was asking and why it was different from asking him to fight. He had not replied to that either. She had concluded that Fielding was not going to help. And now he was standing in the doorway of Hartwell Supply with his hat in his hands, looking like a man who has made a decision that cost him something. Mrs. Dawson, he said, I need to talk to you. She set down the shipment manifest. Come in, she said. Davis Fielding was a heavy-set man in his mid-40s who had built the Fielding mill with his father and watched it be quietly absorbed, over a period of 3 years, into an arrangement that left him technically the owner and practically the employee. He had given Evelyn whispered sentences 6 weeks ago and looked over his shoulder when he was done. He did not look over his shoulder now. My wife read your letters, he said. Both of them. I didn't tell her about them, she found them in my desk. He paused. She told me that if I didn't come down here and talk to you, she was going to come down here herself. Something in Evelyn's chest shifted. What changed? She asked. Fielding was quiet for a moment. Whitmore's man came by the mill 3 days ago, he said. He'd heard about your complaint to the Commerce Board. He didn't threaten me directly. He was very polite about it. His voice tightened. He told me that it would be a shame if the state investigators decided to look closely at the terms of the mill's operating arrangement. Because if they did, they might find irregularities that could complicate my ownership claims. Evelyn understood immediately. He's going to try to use you as leverage against the investigation. If you look like you're implicated in the irregularities, then anything I say about him looks like self-defense, Fielding said. I know. He looked at his hands. I signed things I shouldn't have signed. At the time, I thought I was saving the mill. I didn't fully understand what I was giving away until it was too late. I know, Evelyn said. If I testify, Fielding said, I'm not just telling the story of what he did to me. I'm admitting that I made choices that weren't right. He looked up at her. But I've been living with those choices for 4 years. And every day they get heavier. And now he's threatening to use them against me anyway. He was quiet for a moment. My wife says that if it's going to come out regardless, it's better it comes out in the light than in the dark. Evelyn looked at him. She's right, Evelyn said. I know she is, Fielding said. She's usually right. Something almost like a rueful smile crossed his face. Mrs. Dawson, I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. The sequence, the pressure, the documents I signed. What those documents actually gave away. He paused. But I need you to tell me that this is going to mean something. That it's not just going to disappear into a state filing room somewhere, and nothing changes. I can't promise the outcome, Evelyn said honestly. But I can tell you that we have Margaret Cooper's testimony, Henry Birch's assessment opinion, Oliver Marsh's documentation from a prior case, the county banker's financial records, and now yours. And I can tell you that Charles Whitmore has spent 12 years operating in darkness. This is the first time someone has turned on enough lights that the pattern is visible. She paused. I believe it will mean something. Fielding looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. I'll talk to your lawyer. He was gone within 20 minutes. Gerald, who had listened from behind the counter, said, 2 witnesses. 2 witnesses, Evelyn said. Does that change what Whitmore can do? It changes what he risks doing, Evelyn said. 1 witness he can discredit. 2 witnesses with corroborating documentation creates a credibility problem he can't solve with reputation attacks. She paused. But he's going to try. She did not have to wait long to find out how. The attack on Marsh came the next morning. An article appeared in the county paper, 2 columns. Positioned prominently, under the byline of a reporter named Calloway, who had a long-standing relationship with Whitmore's social circle. The article described the Commerce Board complaint as the product of a campaign orchestrated by an outside attorney with a documented history of pursuing wealthy landowners through speculative claims, and cited 2 prior cases, both of which Evelyn had never heard of as examples of Marsh's alleged pattern of behavior. She read it at the desk before Jacob was awake. When he came through and saw her face, he stopped. What happened? He said. She handed him the paper. He read it standing up quickly. That's fabricated, he said. The cases may exist, Evelyn said. I don't know yet. But even if they do, the framing is deliberately misleading. Marsh doesn't chase wealthy landowners. He handles commerce disputes. She paused. This is Preston's work. This is the narrative shift I told you to expect. Can Marsh respond? He can, Evelyn said. And he will. But a response takes days to print, and by then half the county has already read this version and filed it. Jacob set the paper down. What do we do? He said. We don't respond to the paper, Evelyn said. That's what Whitmore wants. He wants us talking about Marsh's history instead of his. We keep moving forward. We get Fielding in front of Marsh today. We get the Commerce Board's investigator who Marsh says is arriving next week. Everything they need the moment they arrive. And the article? We let the truth answer it, Evelyn said. Not our words, the evidence. Jacob was quiet. That takes nerve, he said. Yes, Evelyn said. It does. He picked up his coffee and looked at her across the kitchen. You have it, he said. In case you need to hear that from someone. She looked at him. You have it too, she said. In case you've forgotten. The Commerce Board investigator arrived 9 days later. His name was Harlan Webb, no relation to Clara, and he was a precise, methodical man from Austin who had the bureaucratic patience of someone who had been lied to professionally for 20 years and had learned to find that interesting rather than exhausting. He set up in the county courthouse meeting room and began the process of formal interviews. Marsh had prepared everyone. Margaret Cooper had made the journey from Abilene and was staying with Clara Webb, which had required both courage and logistical coordination that Evelyn found genuinely moving. Davis Fielding came in with a leather folder of documents that he had apparently been keeping since the arrangement was first proposed, original drafts, correspondence, his own handwritten notes from meetings. Henry Birch had submitted his written opinion and agreed to confirm it by letter if required. The county banker, whose name was Alcott, and who walked into the courthouse with the stiff posture of a man who has finally decided that doing the right thing is worth the cost, provided 3 years of financial records tracing the movement of money through Whitmore's holding company structures. Investigator Webb interviewed each of them privately over 3 days. On the evening of the second day, He asked to speak with Evelyn. She went alone, which she had not done with any of the previous legal meetings. Jacob had offered to come, and she had told him she needed to do this one herself. She wasn't sure why, until she was sitting across from Webb in the quiet of the meeting room. And he said, "Mrs. Dawson, you assembled this. I want to understand why." She looked at him. "Because someone needed to," she said. "There are other people who have been affected by Mr. Whitmore's practices for longer than you," Webb said. "The Cooper family, the Fieldings. Why now? Why you?" "Because I was in a position to do something the others weren't," Evelyn said. "I had the evidence-gathering skills, the resources to hire Marsh. And," she paused for a moment, "I had a husband whose independence meant I wasn't operating alone." "Your marriage was part of the strategy," Webb said. "My marriage was a decision," Evelyn said carefully. "It became stronger than strategy." Webb studied her. "I want to be direct with you," he said. "The complaint you've filed is the most comprehensively documented case I have seen come to this board in 11 years. The pattern it describes, the corroboration from multiple independent sources. The prior case Mr. Marsh contributed, this is not a speculative claim. This is a documented method." Evelyn waited. "I cannot tell you the outcome," Webb said. "That's not my determination to make. But I can tell you that the case is going forward." Something moved through her, not relief exactly, but something larger. The particular feeling of something that has been held tightly for a very long time, being allowed to release. "Thank you," she said. She walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon. Jacob was waiting outside, sitting on the steps, the way he had waited outside every meeting and every conversation and every difficult room she had had to walk into alone, not inside. Not hovering, but there, present, within reach. He looked at her face when she came out, and he read it the way he read everything that mattered. "It's going forward," he said. "It's going forward," she said. He stood. They stood on the courthouse steps together in the afternoon light of Willow Creek. And Evelyn thought about 12 miles of Texas dust and a rehearsed speech she had mostly abandoned, and a man who had set down his hammer and waited for her to finish. She thought about all the things she had not expected when she had made the most desperate decision of her life. Then Jacob said quietly, with the directness that she had come to understand, was simply who he was. "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him. "I stopped thinking of this as an arrangement," he said. "Somewhere between the Patterson visit and the Birch assessment, and all of the days in between. I don't know exactly when, but I need you to know that." She looked at him. Her heart was doing something complicated. "Jacob," she started. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I'm not asking for anything." I just stopped. Started again. "I think it's important that you know." She thought about the chair at his kitchen table. The empty years he had described without self-pity. The way he put the kettle on without being asked. The way he always waited for her to finish, for her to decide, for her to be ready with a patience that was not passivity, but something she had come to understand was its own form of profound respect. "I stopped thinking of it as an arrangement too," she said. "I don't know when either, but I know it was before we rode to Birch's house. Because on the way back, I thought about how I didn't want to do it alone. Not just the case, any of it." Jacob looked at her. Something in his face, the careful guardedness that she had watched ease. Increment by increment over 12 weeks of living and working alongside each other, let go. Not all at once. Jacob Dawson was not an all-at-once kind of man. "But enough, we should go home," he said. "Yes," Evelyn said. They walked to the horses together. Behind them in the county courthouse, Investigator Harlan Webb was working through the final documentation of a case that was going to take month and cost Charles Whitmore something significant. Ahead of them, the ranch waited with its accounts and its cattle and its repaired fences and its lamp that burned steady in the kitchen window. Between them, something that had begun as strategy and survived pressure and been tested by fear had arrived somewhere that neither of them had known to look for. They rode home in the afternoon quiet, and this time, neither of them needed the silence to mean nothing. It meant everything. The investigation took 4 months. Evelyn had known it would take time. Marsh had told her from the beginning that the Commerce Board moved at its own pace, that formal investigations were not races but excavations slow, methodical, layered. She had accepted that. What she had not fully prepared for was the particular difficulty of living inside that time, while Whitmore was still operating, still present, still capable of making things difficult in the incremental ways that had always been his specialty. He did not stop. She had not expected him to stop, but some part of her had hoped that the formal investigation would create a kind of pause, a period in which he pulled back and waited to see what happened. Instead, he pushed harder. The business license dispute that Preston had filed with the Count Board required 3 separate hearings, each of which Evelyn attended with Marsh's written guidance in hand and Gerald beside her, and each of which was resolved in Hartwell Supply's favor through documentation so thorough that the county board members looked increasingly uncomfortable presiding over a complaint that was obviously manufactured. The water rights on Jacob's eastern pasture were formally invoked 6 weeks into the investigation. That was the move she had feared most, and when Jacob told her, standing in the kitchen doorway the morning after he had received the notice, holding the paper with the same controlled steadiness he brought to everything, she felt something cold move through her that she refused to let settle. "How long before it affects the cattle?" she asked. "If we restructure the grazing rotation, I can keep the operation viable for the season," Jacob said. "It costs time and it costs feed we'd planned to conserve. But it's manageable." "He's trying to force a financial crisis," Evelyn said. "Yes," Jacob said. "While the investigation is ongoing, he can't make legal moves against us directly, but he can make the ranch expensive enough that we run out of stability before the investigation produces results." She sat down at the table. "We need to accelerate something," she said. "Marsh?" Jacob said. "Marsh can't accelerate the board," Evelyn said. "But there's something else." She had been thinking about it since the night before. Since the moment Jacob had come in with that carefully neutral face, and she had known before he spoke that the water rights notice had arrived. The people who know what Whitmore is doing, the ones we talked to, the ones who declined his arrangements, the ones who gave testimony, they've been quiet since the investigation began. Individually quiet, because they each assumed the legal process was handling it. "And you think they should stop being quiet," Jacob said. "I think Charles Whitmore has operated for 12 years, because everyone in this county believed they were alone," Evelyn said. "The legal case addresses what he did. It doesn't address the fact that people are still afraid of him. And as long as they're afraid, he still has power whether the investigation finds against him or not." Jacob looked at her. "What are you thinking?" he said. "Clara Webb came to me last week," Evelyn said. "She wants to organize a public meeting. Community hall, open to anyone. Not about the investigation, just about the businesses in this county. The ranchers, what people need, what's been happening." She paused. "She asked if I'd speak, will you?" Jacob asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. "But I want you there." He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." "It's not a legal forum," Evelyn said. Marsh said to be careful. "Anything that looks like a public campaign to influence the investigation could be used against us." "Then we don't talk about the investigation," Jacob said. "We talk about the community." She looked at him. "That's exactly right," she said. He picked up his coffee. "Clara Webb's meeting," he said. "When?" 2 weeks, Evelyn said. "Then we have 2 weeks to make sure the right people are in the room," he said. She was already making a list. The water rights restructuring cost Jacob 3 weeks of hard work. She did not watch from a distance. She learned the rotation he needed. She tracked the feed calculations. She rode the eastern fence line with him on the days when the work required 2 people. And she did not pretend the situation was smaller than it was. They were being squeezed, deliberately and precisely, by a man who understood exactly how much pressure it took to make a ranching operation fail. But they did not fail. They bent, and they did not break. And in the bending, they discovered something about themselves, about the specific quality of what they had built together that Evelyn thought she would carry for the rest of her life. They did not perform strength for each other. They did not pretend to be fine when they were tired, or frustrated, or frightened. On the nights When the accounts looked worst, Jacob would sit at the table with her and work through the numbers without false reassurance. And on the nights when she was too exhausted to find the logic in what they were doing, he would make tea and sit across from her and simply be present until the exhaustion passed. She had not known before Jacob that presence could be its own form of courage. One evening, about 3 weeks into the water rights difficulty, she was going through the feed calculations for the third time and making no progress. And she put down the pen and said, "I keep thinking I made a mistake." Jacob looked up. "What mistake?" he said. "I keep thinking that if I had handled the initial Whitmore pressure differently, if I had found another way, something that didn't involve you, something that kept all of this at the store and didn't bring it to your land and your cattle and your water, then you wouldn't be losing 3 weeks of work on a rotation problem that is my fault." Jacob was quiet for a moment. She had learned to wait during those moments. "When I was building this ranch," he said, "I broke my hand in the second year. Post-driver accident. Bad fracture. I was alone out here, and I couldn't work for 6 weeks, and I fell behind on everything: fencing, cattle care, all of it. By the time I healed, I had lost 2 months of work, and I had to start over on the eastern section." "Jacob, I'm telling you something," he said. "Give me a moment." She waited. "At the time I thought, if I had been more careful, this wouldn't have happened. If I had worked slower, if I had asked for help." He paused. "But the truth was, I was doing the right work at the right pace, and it was an accident. Not a mistake. There's a difference." He looked at her directly. "You were doing the right thing at the right pace," he said. "What Whitmore is doing to this ranch is not your fault. It's his fault, and the only way to make it mean something is to not let it stop us." She looked at him for a long moment. "You never talk about the first years of this ranch," she said. "No. Were they very hard?" "Yes," he said simply. "Harder than I expected, and harder than I let myself admit at the time." "Why didn't you let yourself admit it?" "Because there was no one to admit it to," he said. "And admitting something hard to yourself, alone, is different from admitting it to someone who understands what it means." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Jacob looked at her hand. He turned his over and held it. Neither of them said anything. It was the first time they had held hands, not the brush of passing, not the practical contact of shared work, but deliberately, quietly, with the full knowledge of what it meant. They sat like that for a while, with the lamp burning, and the feed calculations spread across the table, and the Texas night pressing against the window. And Evelyn thought, "This is what I came 12 miles to find. Not a strategy, not a solution, this." Clara Webb's community meeting was held on a Friday evening. The turnout was larger than Evelyn had anticipated. She had hoped for 30 people. 63 showed up, filling the community hall with the slightly surprised energy of people who had each arrived expecting to be one of a handful, and discovered instead that they were part of something considerably larger. Clara opened the meeting with the particular competence of a woman who has run a classroom for 30 years and understands exactly how to hold a room. She framed it as a conversation about the county's commercial future, straightforward, non-inflammatory language that gave people permission to speak without feeling they were taking a side in a legal dispute. The first 15 minutes were careful. People talked in generalities. The difficulty of maintaining supplier relationships, the unpredictability of county arrangements, the sense that small businesses and ranching operations were working harder to stay stable than they should need to. Then Daniel Patterson stood up. He was not a man who made speeches. He was a rancher who talked to other ranchers about practical things. And when he stood, half the room recognized him and went quiet. "I was approached 6 months ago with a water arrangement offer," he said. "I almost took it. I didn't, because someone showed me what happened to the people who did." He looked around the room. "I think most of you know who made those kinds of offers. And I think most of you have been afraid to say it out loud." He paused. "I'm not afraid anymore. And I wanted you to know that." He sat down. The room held the particular silence of a space where something has just been said that cannot be unsaid. Then Frances Alcott stood, the banker's wife, in a room full of people who knew her husband held the notes on half their properties. Standing up in a public forum to speak, Evelyn watched the room react to it in real time, watched the recalibration happening in people's faces as they processed what it meant that she was standing. "My husband wanted to be here tonight," Frances said. "He has obligations that prevented it. But he asked me to tell you that anyone who has questions about the financial arrangements in this county is welcome to speak with him privately." She paused. "He should have said that sooner. He knows that." A man in the back said, "We all should have said things sooner." There was a murmur through the room that was not agreement exactly, but was something close to the collective acknowledgement of a long shared silence. Finally named, Clara looked at Evelyn. Evelyn stood. She had not planned a speech. She had thought about what she wanted to say. But she had decided that planning a speech was the wrong approach, that the room would hear the preparation in it, would feel the distance between a performance and a genuine person. So she simply told them the truth. "I came to this county 4 months ago as a single woman trying to protect her father's business," she said. "I was frightened and I was running out of options. I made an unconventional decision, which many of you know about." A small ripple of recognition moved through the room. What I did not expect was how many people in this county were carrying the same fear. The same sense of operating alone against something too large to fight individually. She stopped. "The point of this meeting is not the investigation," she said. "The investigation is a legal matter, and it will be resolved the way legal matters are resolved: slowly, imperfectly, through processes that most of us don't control." She looked around the room. "The point of this meeting is that you are not alone. Whatever each of you decides to do with that, whatever you choose to say or not say, join or not join, support or withhold, knowing that you are not alone is something no legal outcome can take away." The room was very quiet. Then Margaret Cooper, who had traveled from Abilene, who had arrived the day before and was staying with Clara, and whose presence in the room Evelyn had not announced, stood up. The room recognized her. People who remembered the Cooper store, who had shopped there for 16 years before it closed, went very still. "I lost everything," Margaret said. Her voice was clear and steady, and she did not look at the floor. "I want you to know what that looked like, specifically, so that no one in this room can say they didn't know what was possible." She told them. All of it, in the same clear, precise detail she had given to Marsh and to Investigator Webb. The sequence of events, the offers, the conditions, what she had signed and what she had lost, and what she had understood too late. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then someone asked a question. Then someone else asked another. Then the room became something Evelyn had not fully anticipated, not a meeting anymore, but a conversation. Real and wide-ranging and sometimes painful, of the kind that a community has when it finally decides to stop pretending a shared problem is a collection of private ones. Jacob found her at the edge of the room about an hour into this. "You all right?" he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "That thing with Margaret Cooper," he said. "You didn't tell me she was going to speak." "I didn't know," Evelyn said. "Clara arranged it without telling me. She thought it should be a surprise." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "Clara Webb is formidable," he said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "She is." He stood beside her, and they watched the room, the conversations overlapping. The tables of people leaning toward each other with the particular intensity of people who are saying things they have needed to say for a very long time. "This is what winning looks like before the verdict," Jacob said quietly. Evelyn looked at him. "Yes," she said, "I think it is." The verdict came 6 weeks later. It was not a single dramatic announcement. It was, true to the nature of State Commerce Board proceedings, a series of findings released in sequence over several days, each more significant than the last. The first finding confirmed that the tax reclassification of Hartwell Supply's warehouse parcel had been made without legitimate statutory basis and was to be reversed immediately. The second finding determined that the financial trick applied to multiple county businesses over a 12-year period constituted a pattern of coordinated interference with commercial operations, and named the holding companies through which the interference had been conducted, all of which traced back to Whitmore. The third finding was the one that mattered most. It referred the case to the State Attorney General's office for criminal review. Marsh brought the findings to Hartwell Supply on a Wednesday afternoon. He set the documents on the back table and walked Evelyn through each one, while Gerald sat at the counter with his hands folded and Jacob stood in the doorway. When Marsh finished, the room was very quiet. Gerald said, "It's over. The Commerce Board investigation is concluded," Marsh said. "The criminal referral means there will be further proceedings. Whitmore's lawyers will mount a defense. Things take time." He paused. "But the pattern is now formally documented. It's on record. And the water rights transfer to his holding company has been flagged as part of the investigation, which means any attempt to enforce those rights against your property," he looked at Jacob, "will be immediately reviewable. So he can't use the water rights," Jacob said. "Not without it looking like retaliation in the context of an active investigation," Marsh said. "Which his lawyers will absolutely advise against." Jacob nodded once. Evelyn was looking at the findings documents. She had read them already. Twice, in the time it had taken Marsh to explain them. She was looking at them now, not for informations, but for something else, trying to feel the full reality of what was in her hands. 12 weeks ago, she had sat in the back office of this store at midnight, looking at numbers that had no path forward. She held the path forward in her hands now. "Evelyn," Gerald said. She looked up. Her father was watching her, with an expression she had seen on his face only a handful of times, the particular expression of a man who has witnessed something that exceeds what he dared to hope for. "Come here," he said. She went to him. He held her the way he had held her when she was 12, and her mother died and the world had become suddenly and permanently smaller with both arms. With the complete conviction of a parent who wants to absorb whatever hurt their child is carrying. She let herself be held. She was 38 years old, and she had not cried through any of the past 4 months, and she did not cry now. But she held her father back with the same conviction and thought, "We did not let him take this from you. We did not let him take this." When she stepped back, Jacob was still in the doorway. She looked at him. He looked at her. Marsh was saying something about next steps, about the Attorney General's timeline, about documents they should preserve. She heard the words. She would address them. But in this moment, looking at Jacob Dawson in the doorway of her father's store, she thought about 12 miles of dust and a fence line and a man who had set down his hammer and waited for her to finish. She crossed the room. She stood in front of him. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head slightly. "You did this. We did this," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the first gesture he had made toward her that was purely tender, without practicality or necessity, simply an expression of something he felt and was no longer hiding from. "Let's go home," he said. "Yes," she said. Charles Whitmore was indicted by the State Attorney General's office 4 months later. The indictment covered 11 years of coordinated commercial interference, fraudulent document filing, and abuse of county administrative processes. His lawyers mounted an extensive defense. The proceedings lasted the better part of a year. He was found liable on 9 of 12 counts. The water rights on Jacob's eastern pasture were returned to the independent trust. The holding companies through which he had operated were dissolved. The financial penalties assessed were significant enough that several of his land holdings had to be sold to satisfy them. Preston left the county before the indictment was handed down. Nobody was surprised. Margaret Cooper did not come back to Willow Creek. But she wrote to Evelyn twice a year for the rest of her life. In the first letter after the verdict, she said, "You told me it would mean something. I want you to know that you were right. Davis Fielding rebuilt the mill. It took 3 years and was not easy, and he came to Evelyn twice during that time for help with accounts and contracts, and she gave it without reservation. By the 4th year, the mill was operating cleanly under full ownership, and Davis Fielding had developed the habit of quietly directing struggling businesses in the county to Hartwell Supply, where the accounts were always fair and the advice was always honest. The county banker Alcott spent 6 months in personal turmoil over the role his bank had played in Whitmore's structures. and then did something that surprised everyone, including his wife. He rewrote the bank's lending guidelines to explicitly prohibit arrangements of the type that had been used as leverage, and published the guidelines publicly in the county paper. Frances told Evelyn it was the first night in 3 years that her husband slept without difficulty. Clara Webb organized a county merchants association within a year of the community meeting, with regular gatherings and a shared agreement to flag unusual commercial pressure for collective review. She ran it for 12 years before retiring, and she told Evelyn at her retirement dinner that the night of the community meeting was the night she understood what she had been building toward for 30 years of teaching. Gerald Hartwell's health stabilized. The doctor said it was care and reduced stress, and a daughter who made sure he was eating properly and not staying at the store until midnight. Gerald said it was all of that, and also something harder to quantify, the particular healing that comes from watching something you spent your life building survive an attempt to take it from you. He lived 7 more years, which was longer than anyone had expected, and he spent them well. In the spring of the year after the verdict, Evelyn and Jacob rebuilt the eastern fence line together. It had needed replacing for months, the damage from the cut wire the previous year, plus the ordinary wear of a hard season. Jacob had done temporary repairs, but the permanent work required 2 people and a week of dedicated effort. They worked in the mornings, when the air was still cool. On the 3rd day, Jacob stopped working, set down the wire, and said, "Evelyn." She looked at him. He was looking at the fence post he had just driven, looking at it with the expression he wore when he was about to say something he had been carrying for a while. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Tell me," she said. "Before you rode out here," he said, "I had convinced myself that the ranch was enough. That work was enough. That I had made my peace with what my life was." "I know," she said. "I hadn't," he said. "I had just gotten very good at not examining it." He looked at her. "You examined everything. You came out here, and you were honest about what you needed and what you could offer and what you were afraid of. And I had been dishonest with myself for so long that I didn't know how to do that anymore." She waited. "You taught me how to do it again," he said. "Not directly. Just by doing it yourself in front of me, every day." She set down the wire she was holding. "Jacob," she said, "I came out here to save my father's store." "I know," he said. "I had a list of reasons why you were the right choice," she said. "Logical reasons. Strategic reasons. I had thought it through the way I think everything through." "I know that too," he said. "What I didn't have on the list," she said, "was that you would be the person I wanted to talk to at the end of every day. That I would miss you when I went to town alone. That the ranch would start to feel like home in a way that had nothing to do with the building and everything to do with you being in it." Jacob looked at her. "Is it on the list now?" he said. "It's at the top of the list," she said. "It should have been there from the beginning." He crossed the distance between them. He put his hand against her face the way he had tucked her hair back in the doorway of Hartwell's Supply, not with drama, but with the particular gentleness of a man who has learned to be careful with things that matter. "I love you," he said. "I don't know when that started, but I know it isn't going anywhere." She put her hand over his. "I love you," she said, "and I have been refusing to call it that for about 3 months because I was afraid it would complicate something that was already working." "Does it complicate it?" he asked. "No," she said. "It simplifies everything." He kissed her. "Not like a scene from something. Like 2 people who have been moving toward each other across the length of a year, through dust and distance and strategy and fear and the long, unglamorous work of learning who someone actually is when the pressure is real, finally arriving somewhere they both belong." People in Willow Creek still talked about it years later. They talked about the Commerce Board case. They talked about the night Margaret Cooper stood up in the community hall. They talked about Alcott's banking guidelines and Clara Webb's Merchants Association and the way the county had changed. Slowly and then decisively, in the years after Whitmore's hold on it was broken. And sometimes people talked about how it had started about the summer morning when the most admired woman in Willow Creek had saddled her horse alone and ridden 12 miles through July heat to knock on a solitary man's door with proposal that nobody else would have dared to make. What those people usually got slightly wrong was the ending. They assumed the story was about a desperate woman who had found a husband and protection. They assumed the lonely rancher had done the rescuing. In the way of stories where one person saves another, and that is the whole point. The truth was more interesting and more true. Evelyn Hartwell had not needed rescuing. She had needed a partner, someone whose integrity matched her own, whose independence could stand alongside hers without diminishing it, whose patience could hold steady while she built something neither of them could have built alone. Jacob Dawson had not needed saving either. He had needed someone who looked at him, actually looked, through 12 miles of distance and 3 years of careful watching, and saw not a man destined to be alone but a man worth choosing. They had chosen each other. That was not a desperate gamble. That was not strategy. That was two people seeing clearly and having the courage to act on what they saw. On the eastern fence line of the Dawson Ranch, there was a section of new wire, straight and solid and properly set, that Evelyn and Jacob had built together in the spring after everything changed. Neither of them thought of it as a monument to anything. It was just good work, done by two people who trusted each other completely, and it held.